after that, a number of years, maybe a couple of 2 to 3 years, towards the end of the period in Mecca, just before the Hijrah, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he married Aisha radiyallahu anha. And he married her at the age, when she was at the age of 6 years, and that is what is correct. And then when they migrated to Medina, this is when the marriage was consummated in the first year of the Hijrah. So he married in the 10th year of, roughly in the 10th year of prophethood in Mecca. And then 3 years later, just after the migration, this is when the marriage was actually consummated. And Aisha radiallahu anha was the most beloved of the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to him. And she was also the most scholarly woman of this nation. She was the female scholar of this nation. And she has many virtues, many excellencies. And obviously from the greatest of them is that she was a scholar, a female scholar. She was the most knowledgeable of the women of this ummah and of the issues of women. And while we are on this topic, we want to stop on this topic here about the issue of the marriage of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because we see there are two types of people that we have to address here. The first of those people are the apologists from the Muslimin, those people who have weak faith, weak iman, and they are the ones who try to tell lies in order to appease and please the disbelievers. They say, no, the marriage, the reports are wrong, and those ahadith are weak and da'if, and Aisha was 16 or 19. All of this is kadhib. All of this is a lie and incorrect, because these ahadith are in Al-Bukhari, and other than Al-Bukhari, they are authentic. They are sahih, they are authentic. We see these people, they suffer from, they have an inferiority complex. The disbelievers bring some shubuhat, they are unable to answer, they have an inferiority complex, they are unable to answer, they don't have firm conviction, and then they start playing around with history, with facts, with that which is authentic, trying to bring arguments which are just really apologetics. You're just trying to make apologetic arguments. You're trying to just explain away and apologize. Right? So this is one group of people that we should be aware of. They are liars in what they are saying, and they are liars in the arguments they are trying to use in order to address the non-Muslims. That obviously leaves the second group, and they are the non-Muslims, the disbelievers who bring these arguments. And the way that we answer these people, we have to understand first of all history, and we have to also understand something about sociology, social life. And so the way we want to address this briefly, as we've raised this topic briefly here in this lesson, is first of all, we have to understand, the first point I wish to make is that in every civilization, in every nation in history, up until the 20th century, meaning in every civilization, in every nation, in every culture for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, up until the turn of the 20th century, what was normal is that a child becomes an adult as soon as they reach puberty. Right? This was standard in every civilization, every nation, every culture. It was standard that a person becomes an adult as soon as the signs of puberty begin to show. Right? The hairs, the mustache, in a boy, the pubic hairs under the arms and between the lines, the breaking of the voice, right, for a male, and for the female, the onset of menstruation, right, and the other signs of puberty. As soon as that occurred, that child became an adult. And that's why you see, if you study many of the rituals that you find, in nations and cultures and civilizations, whether South America, North America, that's before the Europeans went to North America and wiped them all out, and many other civilizations, you'll find that they have rituals that mark a child becoming an adult, becoming a man, or a girl becoming a woman. And the onset of that is marked by the signs of puberty. You will find this in all these civilizations and nations, right? So this is the first point that we have to keep in our minds. That's the first point. Keep in mind that when did a child become an adult? It was at puberty. Right, so that's one thing you keep in your mind. The second thing that you have to keep in mind is that the mental maturity, meaning when does a child become mentally mature? Right? Is it tied to puberty or not? I'm asking the audience a question. I'm asking the attendees a question. Answer this question to me. When a child becomes mentally mature, the age at which a child becomes mentally mature, is it tied to puberty or not? Give me the answer.
From experience that I have, no.
No. Well, that's the right answer. The answer is that mental maturity, meaning that you are mentally mature, you understand the world around you, you're able to understand right and wrong, you're able to interact socially with other people of your age and of people older than you, and you'll be able to understand that interaction and make decisions, right? You are able to conduct yourself. This is what we call, this is like mental maturity. This is not tied to puberty, right? If you study history, you will find, and in fact in the biographies of the Sahaba, you will find mentally mature children, and not a single hair has appeared on their face. No pubic hair has appeared under their armpits. These are mentally mature children, mentally mature, right? And the same you find in all of the nations as well. In all of the nations, because traditionally, in every nation, children were taught to become like adults at a very early age because of responsibility, because they had to work, because they had to take responsibilities that the parents put on them. Even at the beginning of this century in England, in Europe, children at the age of, before they were even 10, 11, 12, they were working in factories. They had to earn a living, they were working in factories at that age. They were mentally mature, right? So mental maturity has got nothing to do with puberty. Keep that in mind. A child can be mentally mature, male or female, male, without even having a single hair on his face or under his armpits, right? A girl can be mentally mature without even having reached menstruation. She hasn't reached a monthly cycles. She's fully mentally mature. Right? You understand that point now. That's point number 2. So once we understand this, the third point now is we have to understand that mental maturity, when does a child become mentally mature, is something that can change according to the environment, according to the circumstances, right? Social circumstances, economic circumstances, right? That's why today, in the 21st century, and it's pretty standard across all civilizations now because of the change in social life, political life, economic life, we see that the age of mental maturity has shifted and moved all the way across, and you find now that children do not become mentally mature until much later in life. Until, in fact, even, it's not an exaggeration, biologically, children become men or women and they're still not mentally mature. Right? So mental maturity, it moves and it fluctuates based upon social life, economic life, political life, and just how life journey is, and it shifts and it moves. Now, as I said to you before, that before the 20th century there was no concept of what we have now today as adolescence, right? Adolescence and the idea of teenage years, this is an invented idea, right? This is an invention. It's not my opinion. This is the view of researchers, academic researchers, social researchers, and all the research papers are out there. I have the research papers, and they study into the idea of adolescence. Adolescence, what this means is when a child becomes mature, shows the signs of puberty, they don't become an adult. Rather, there's a period of time in which they gradually become an adult, right? This idea is an invention. It didn't exist before the 20th century. Right? And there are reasons for that. There are many factors and reasons given for that. Children were taken out of the workforce. Entertainment came along. Entertainment, radio, then TV, then cinema. And, the way it treated children. And, by way of like figures and things like that, actors and whatever, which were idolized, in teenage life and all that nonsense. All of that is something that's a social idea imposed upon children, right? So, this tells us that mental maturity is purely to do with the circumstances. You could have a child living in the South American jungle somewhere in the Amazon, 5 years old, 6 years old, who is mentally mature, has the skills of his father and the tribe, right? Is able to do, like ride an animal, hunt an animal, make a house, in the way that they make houses, fully mentally mature. No hair on his face, no hair under his armpits, right? And you can have a 20-year-old person living in the West, fed with Teletubbies, and nurtured upon, everything that demolishes your mind and makes you a retrograde, a retard. Right? He will reach the age of 20 and he can't hammer a nail into a piece of wood. Right? Forget that, he can't even cut a loaf of bread. Right? So this shows that mental maturity and being competent as an adult, right, it has got nothing to do with what the government makes it legal. Do you understand? Right? There is biological adulthood, right? Biologically, which is the age of puberty, right? That's biological adulthood, right? There is the issue of mental maturity. You can be biologically an adult, you are not mentally mature though. You understand that, right? Then there is legal adulthood, right? So in these Western countries, they say you are legally an adult at the age of 18. Now you can engage, now you can drink. Now you can fornicate, right? Now you can become married. That's legal adulthood. This is a pure invention, right? Pure invention in all these laws. Opposes everything that was known in thousands and thousands of years of history. So, once we brought all of these facts together, we've mentioned, what did we mention first? What was the first point? Puberty? Yep. Puberty. Then we mentioned mental maturity. Then we mentioned the effect of social life, economy, politics, and how it changes and how it affects mental maturity depending in location, time, place, and just the environment, whatever. Right, so now this brings us, we want to bring some quotations. We want to bring a number of quotations from here from... all right, let's start with... Well, I'm going to read to you some quotations. These are from the book, from the Noble Revered Prophet of Islam. This is a book, inshallah, will be released in a couple of weeks. In defense of the Prophet, ﷺ, against these evil cartoonists, the European cartoonists, the liars and fraudsters, hateful, spiteful cartoonists who try to mock the Prophet ﷺ. And so these are some quotations I'm going to read to you, which are in this book. Not all of them. Some of the ones I'm going to read are in for the second edition of the book. But just listen, and you will see the lie of these people and the mockery of these people fall back upon themselves. So, in the 19th century, the usual age of consent Consent meaning the legal right to have relations. In the US was 10 years of age, meaning that it was legal for a girl of 10 years of age to consent to have marital relations. And in the state of Delaware is one of the states in America, until the mid 1960s, right? That is 50 years ago. The age was 7 years of age. 7 years of age, meaning that a girl of 7 years of age could consent to marital relations legally. This is legal now. We're not talking about puberty. We're not talking about mental maturity. We are talking about legal. What is legal, right? So, we have a statement here. Richard Posner, who is the Chief Judge of the US Court of Appeals, and Catherine Silbo, who is the Associate Professor at Boston University School of Law. And they have a book called A Guide to America's Sex Laws, 1996, University of Chicago Press. They say, in fact, the quote that I've just mentioned to you from them is that the usual age of consent was 10 years of age. The next quote is a professor of sociology, Anthony Joseph Paul Cortese, who says, in 1962, the American Law Institute recommended that the legal age of consent, meaning to relations, which is should be dropped in every state to the age of 10. In fact, until the mid-1960s, the legal age of consent in Delaware was 7. So a 50-year-old man could legally have intercourse with a 7-year-old boy or girl, right? This is legal. Legally, it is lawful and legal, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, right? So, it now begins to give you a much better picture of the reality of this. And we'll come to the issue of their claims in a short while, inshallah. But just keep these facts in mind. In another quotation, American sociologist Mike Males, he writes that he says these early laws specified that a girl consenting to relations had to be at least 10 to 12 years in most states, with a few specifying ages as old as 14 or 16. In Delaware, the age of consent was 7, based on ancient English laws setting the age squire. What this means is that in the English laws in the colonial period, right, the laws determined that basically that a girl can become engaged and married from the age 7 onwards. Right, this was standard practice, even amongst royalty in the colonial years, amongst the princes, the princesses, as we shall see. Margaret Wade Labage, she's a professor of history, and she's speaking in the book A Medieval Miscellany. She says, it must be remembered that many medieval widows were not old. Important heiresses, these are princesses, right, who were going to inherit from their fathers, the kings or whatever else, were often married between the age of, do you want to give me a guess?
3 maybe.
1 day old.
Between the age of what?
5 and 7.
You got the first one right. Second one?
6.
10. Okay. Were often married between the ages of 5 and 10. Right? This is royalty, European royalty. Heiresses who are going to earn a lot of wealth and land and property and so on and so forth from their fathers. They were married between the age of 5 and 10. And it doesn't end there. And they might find themselves widowed while still in their teens. Right? So they become married and they will lose their husband and they are still teenagers, right? They've barely hit 13, 14. Right? Okay, so now this deals the issue of marriage. Right? We also have the issue of adolescence And we'll bring another quote here from Arthur Sicken, he's basically just an author who's written on the emphatic civilization, I think this is. So he says, traditionally across the globe, the age of consent for marital relations was a matter for the family to decide, or a tribal custom. Right? This was decided by the family, it was a tribal custom. In most cases, this coincided with signs of puberty, menstruation for a woman, and pubic hair for a man. Sir Edward Coke in 17th century England made it clear that the marriage of girls under 12 was normal, and the age at which a girl who was a wife was eligible for a dower from her husband's estate was 9. The American colonies followed the English tradition, and the law was more of a guide. In other words, the law said, 9, 10, whatever else, but that was just a guide. It wasn't fixed. It wasn't legal. That was just a general guide. The American colonies followed the English tradition, and the law was more of a guide. For example, Mary Hathaway of Virginia was only 9 when she was married to William Williams. This Mary Hathaway is like some famous person. He says, keep in mind, he says, and to my surprise, until the latter part of the 19th century, children in the Western nations were engaged and married at a much earlier age. The trend to give children more time to mature is relatively new. Right? Then we have another quote here. He says, basically saying, society started to think of childhood as extending beyond puberty into the later teenage years. Before that, children were considered to graduate into adulthood with the onset of puberty. We have a couple more here. There's another one here. Oh yeah, there's another one, a book, about adolescence. The writer Caroline Cocker, she writes, at what age is a person capable of making an informed decision about whether or not to engage in relations, marital relations? Would it be 7, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 21? Over the last 300 years, all the ages listed above were thought to be that age at which one could make such a decision. And all the ages listed above have at various times been inscribed into law as the age of consent, meaning to be able to consent to have relations. And finally, Edward J. Wood. This is actually an interesting book. Edward J. Wood, he wrote a book. It's called The Wedding Day, in all ages and countries. Right? This book was published in 1869, and what he did, he went and studied every nation, civilization, with Europe, South America, North America, everywhere, and he looked at what were their customs and habits when it comes to marriage, and the day of marriage itself. What would they do? And so in here he writes, fathers who possessed rank and wealth gave away their children at a very early age and compelled them to marry on arriving at puberty. And then he says, a page later, Thomas, Lord Berkeley, was contracted to Margaret, daughter of Gerald Warren, Lord Isle, in the 41st year of the reign of Edward III, and by reason of her tender age, she was then only about 7 years old. It was arranged that she should remain with her father for 4 more years, but because of sickness happening in the family, they were married in the November following. Meaning he married her when she was still 7 or 8. Right? This was something that was normal, standard practice. Okay, so now we've established that the normal practice amongst the Europeans, and in fact all civilizations and nations, right up until the 19th, 20th century, was that marriage at the age of puberty was perfectly normal. The European royalty were doing this. Right? They had reasons, whatever they had to do it. Yeah. So, now we've answered the fourth issue now. The issue of, marriage amongst the Europeans. Now this brings us really to the final issue, which is, why do they now look at the issue of children, and they have this word called paedophilia. Right? Why do they have this? And why is it that they use this now to completely change the normal custom and habit, like the perception we have towards the normal custom and habit that was found in civilizations and centuries, including Europeans and their royalty for, many centuries. Why is that perception changed? The reason is because, you see, in the 20th century, along came these atheist philosophies. Nihilism, existentialism. These philosophies, what they are basically saying is that nothing exists except this life. There's no purpose, no direction, there's no reason. Human life is meaningless, doesn't have any inherent meaning. We just live, we die, we turn to dust and stones, and there isn't any basis for any morals. Right? Because life is meaningless, there are no morals. There is no absolute right and wrong. And so because of that, we are free to pursue our own meanings in life. We can make our own life. So for example, if a person wants to exploit children who are not mentally mature, right? Now keep this in mind. I said who are not mentally mature, right? They're not mentally mature, like as we find in the society today. Children who are raised on Teletubbies and, all this nonsense, and, by the age of 20, they're still mentally immature, right? So we see these movements came along, these sexual liberation movements, right? They were saying we should be free to pursue our desires. In the late 60s and 70s, this movement was in England, it was in Europe, it was in France, it was in all these places. And you found that the intellectual people, the philosophers and whatever, they were signing petitions. We should be allowed to, have relations with, children of 7, years, 8 years, 9 years, 10 years. We should be allowed. Why are they saying this? This has got nothing to do with the standard practice in nations, cultures, civilizations for thousands of years, who would marry their children with their full knowledge in the institution of marriage. This has got nothing to do with that. This is, we want to follow our desires. We want to fornicate with children because we find it exciting, because we've had enough with having multiple female partners. We've had enough with homosexuality. We want to pursue and, pursue other desires, right? This is the angle from which they are coming from, right? So exploitation of children and wanting to fornicate with them, this comes from the sexual liberation movements in the 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever. And so in that period, don't you now find, it's really amazing and funny how you see now all these people are being prosecuted, all of these actors, famous people, right, with cases going back to the 70s. Oh, this man, he molested me in the 70s when I was just whatever. All these cases are now coming. Jimmy Savile, who else is there? All these people, they are now being brought out, and they're being big word pedophile. Right? So we as Muslims, we should not be stepping on the back foot and apologizing. Rather, we should, with voices, with our voices, with pride and with conviction, we should boast of this marriage of the Prophet ﷺ to Aisha. For the reason that there are wisdoms behind this. Because Islam came as a perfect guidance, and there are many rulings pertaining to marriage. Many rulings pertaining to marriage which have come through the knowledge of Aisha radiyallahu anha. And because we've seen, look at how this normal practice of two adults becoming married is a practice which continued across the whole world, including Europe, right until the 19th, even the 20th century. It was a normal practice. It was not considered to be nothing wrong with it at all. And even now it's still a normal practice in certain cultures and tribes in different remote parts of the world. Right? So we shouldn't be stepping on the back foot and apologizing for this. Right? Rather, we should be proud of this. And this is from the perfection of the Sharia, and there's a wisdom behind that. And so therefore we see it from Aisha, all of the rulings pertaining to women's issues, to do with menstruation, to do with marital relations, to do with all of these things have come through Aisha, the female scholar, radiyallahu anha. So we don't apologize. We don't have anything to hide. Rather, every mockery they make is against them. Is against them. They try to mock the Prophet ﷺ, rather the mockery falls back upon themselves. Right? This word that you use, paedophilia, that is your sexual liberation movements. That's you people. You people have turned what is a normal practice amongst your ancestors, the European aristocracy, the European nobility, not far back, even in the past 100, 120 years, even in India, when they were in India for the many hundreds of years they were there, this was a normal practice amongst them. And you've turned it and you've twisted it because in your society are sick people, like Jimmy Savile and other than them, who in the 70s, 80s, 90s, this movement came of sexual liberation, right? And so you put a twist on this whole word, and you made this, and you turn this into a mental disease, right? So none of that changes history. None of that changes, what we know through biology of becoming, the signs of puberty. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't change anything, right? So these are some of the points that we wanted to stop and mention here, since we mentioned this issue, and we don't apologize for this. And but when we speak about it with knowledge, with conviction, and and there is a lot more that can be said. But inshallah, if you remember these 3 or 4 points, inshallah, that should be sufficient. So this now brings us